In 2008, a scientist held a bone fragment in her hand. It was smaller than a paperclip. It came from a child's finger. And it didn't match anything in the known record of human evolution. Not Neanderthal, not modern human. Something else entirely. Something that had been living alongside our ancestors. Hunting, adapting, surviving. For hundreds of thousands of years. And we had no idea they existed. They had no name, no face, no place in any history book. But here's the part that should stop you cold. Billions of people alive right now carry their DNA. You might be one of them. This is the story of the Denisovans, and what science finally pulled out of the dark. By the end of this video, you're going to understand who they were, where they lived, what they looked like, and why a skull hidden in a Chinese well for 85 years just changed everything we thought we knew. We're going to go through the evidence piece by piece, and I'll tell you exactly what's confirmed, what's inferred, and what's still wide open. Here's the version of human history most people learned in school. Modern humans evolved in Africa. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia. The two groups met, interbred a little, and then Neanderthals went extinct. End of story. That story isn't wrong, but it's missing a chapter. For most of the 20th century, paleoanthropologists worked from fossils. You find a bone, you study its shape, you compare it to what you already know. That method gave us a lot, but it had a blind spot. It could only tell you about the people whose bones survived, and some people left almost no bones at all. The Denisovans are the most dramatic example of that blind spot. For hundreds of thousands of years, they ranged across Asia, from the frozen steppes of Siberia to the high-altitude plateau of Tibet to the tropical forests of Southeast Asia. They interbred with Neanderthals. They interbred with our ancestors. They passed genes into populations that are still alive today, and we didn't know any of that until 2010, because the discovery didn't come from a fossil. It came from a fragment of DNA so small, so degraded, that extracting it required technology that didn't exist a decade earlier. The Denisovans weren't found, they were decoded. And what that decoding revealed is one of the strangest stories in the history of science. The cave had been occupied for at least 300,000 years. 3 different kinds of humans had sheltered inside it. And for most of that time, nobody knew. Denisova Cave sits in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, near the border of Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China. Russian archaeologists had been excavating it for decades. They'd found stone tools, animal bones, ornaments, the usual record of ancient human life. In 2008, they found something unusual in the eastern gallery of the cave, a fragment of a finger bone. Specifically, the distal phalanx, the tip, of a juvenile's pinky finger. It was tiny, unremarkable to look at, the kind of thing that might have been overlooked in a less careful excavation. But the team sent it to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. And there, a geneticist named Johannes Krause, working under the direction of Svante Pääbo, did something that had never been done before with a specimen that old. He sequenced its mitochondrial DNA. The results came back in 2010, and they didn't match anything, not Neanderthal, not modern human. The mitochondrial DNA was so different from both that it implied this individual's lineage had split from the Neanderthal line roughly 640,000 years ago, far earlier than anyone expected. The paper was published in Nature in March 2010. The scientific world stopped. Here was a third branch of the human family. Not a variant, not a subspecies. A genuinely distinct lineage defined entirely by its genome, with no skull, no skeleton, no face to put to the name. They called them Denisovans, after the cave. Now, here's what's important to understand about that moment. The discovery wasn't just about one finger bone, it was about what that finger bone proved was possible. If a lineage this significant had gone undetected for this long, if an entire branch of humanity had been living across Asia for hundreds of thousands of years without leaving a single recognized fossil, then the human family tree wasn't a tree at all. It was a web, and we'd only been looking at a few of the threads. But the finger bone was just the beginning, because the more scientists looked, the stranger the picture got. Here's the question that drove the next decade of research. If Denisovans were real, if they ranged across an entire continent, then where are the rest of their bones? Why do we have almost nothing? And more importantly, what did they actually look like? Hold that question. We're going to come back to it. By 2019, scientists had figured out how to read a face from a genome. Not perfectly, but well enough to make predictions, and then test them against real fossils. The technique is called DNA methylation mapping. Here's the short version. Your DNA doesn't just carry the code for building proteins. It also carries a layer of chemical tags, methyl groups that act like volume knobs on your genes. They turn certain genes up or down, which affects how your body develops, and those patterns are preserved in ancient DNA. A team led by David Gochman and Liran Carmel at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem compared the methylation patterns of the Denisovan genome with those of Neanderthals and modern humans. They identified 56 anatomical features where Denisovans likely differed. The predicted profile: an elongated face, a wide, flat skull, wider than both Neanderthals and modern humans, a long dental arch, a broad rib cage, a wide pelvis, large joints. Critical note: this is an inference. A well-grounded, scientifically rigorous inference, but not a confirmed portrait. The team tested the method on Neanderthals and chimpanzees, whose anatomy is well documented, and achieved about 85% accuracy. That's impressive. It's not 100%. But then something happened that gave the method real credibility: the Xiahe mandible. In 1980, a monk exploring Baixia Karst cave on the Tibetan Plateau found a jawbone. He didn't know what it was. He donated it to a local monastery. It sat there for decades. In 2019, a team led by Jean-Jacques Hublin, Frida Welker, and Dongju Zhang published a paper in Nature, identifying it. Because the bone's DNA had degraded beyond recovery, they used a different technique: paleoproteomics. They analyzed the collagen protein sequences preserved in one of the molars. The result: Denisovan. The jaw was at least 160,000 years old. It was the first Denisovan fossil found outside Denisova Cave, and it was sitting at an altitude of over 3,280 meters, the roof of the world. More importantly, the jaw matched 7 of the 8 predictions the methylation model had made for Denisovan jaw morphology. The model worked, and if the model worked for the jaw, it raised a much bigger question. What about the rest of the face? In 2012, archaeologists in Denisova Cave found a bone fragment about the size of a thumbnail. It came from a long bone, probably a limb. They cataloged it and moved on. 6 years later, it changed the way scientists think about ancient human relationships. In 2018, a team led by Viviane Sloan and Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute sequenced the genome of that fragment. The individual was female. She was at least 13 years old when she died. She lived roughly 90,000 years ago. And her parents were 2 different species. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. They named her Denny. Denny is the only known first-generation hybrid of 2 distinct archaic human groups ever found. She's not a theoretical construct, she's a real individual with a real genome, whose existence proves that Neanderthals and Denisovans weren't just aware of each other. They were having children together. And it goes further. Analysis of her Denisovan father's genome showed that he too had Neanderthal ancestors somewhere in his lineage. The interbreeding wasn't a one-time accident, it was a pattern. The boundaries between these groups were porous. The human family tree wasn't a clean diagram with neat, separate branches. It was a tangle, a web of encounters, relationships, and shared ancestry stretching across tens of thousands of years. Denny is the proof. For years, the assumption was that Denisovans were a Siberian group, cold-adapted, cave-dwelling, limited in range. That assumption was wrong. The Xiahe mandible put them on the Tibetan Plateau 160,000 years ago. That's not just a different location, it's a fundamentally different environment. The air at that altitude has roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. Surviving there requires specific physiological adaptations. Denisovans had them. In 2022, a team led by Fabrice Demeter identified a Denisovan molar from Cobra cave in Laos, dated between 164,000 and 131,000 years ago. Tropical Southeast Asia, humid, forested, completely unlike Siberia. In 2025, proteomic analysis of the Penghu 1 mandible, a fossil pulled from the seafloor off Taiwan, confirmed another Denisovan presence in a subtropical coastal environment. And then there's the genetic evidence from modern populations, which pushes the range even further. The high levels of Denisovan DNA in Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and Papuans, 3 to 6% of their genome, suggest that a distinct Denisovan population lived in island Southeast Asia and interbred with modern humans as they moved through the region. A 2021 study by Maximilian Larina and Matthias Jakobsen found that the Aita Magbukon, an indigenous group in the Philippines, carry the highest known level of Denisovan ancestry in the world, roughly 30 to 40% more than Papuans. The Denisovans weren't a Siberian cave group. They were a continent-spanning population, as ecologically diverse as any human group that has ever lived. Here's the part that makes this personal. The Denisovans are gone, but they're not entirely gone. Because when modern humans moved through Asia tens of thousands of years ago, they met Denisovan populations, and they interbred, and some of those ancient genes got passed down, generation after generation, until they ended up in people alive today. Some of those genes were neutral, just passengers in the genome, neither helpful nor harmful. But some of them were extraordinarily useful. The clearest example is a gene called EPAS1. EPAS1 regulates how your body responds to low oxygen. In most humans, living at high altitude triggers a cascade of physiological responses. Your body produces more red blood cells, your blood thickens, and over time, that can cause serious health problems. Tibetans don't have that problem. They've lived on the plateau for thousands of years, at altitudes that would incapacitate most people, and their bodies handle it with remarkable efficiency. In 2014, a team led by Emilia Huerta Sanchez published a paper in Nature showing why. Tibetans carry a specific variant of the EPAS1 gene that is almost entirely absent in other human populations, except in Denisovan DNA. The gene was inherited from a Denisovan-like population roughly 48,700 years ago. It sat in the genome, largely neutral, until modern humans began permanently settling the Tibetan Plateau around 9,000 years ago. At that point, it became one of the most powerfully selected genes in recent human evolution. A gene from an extinct species, a species we didn't even know existed until 2010, is the reason Tibetan communities can live where most humans cannot. That's not the only example. In Papuan populations, Denisovan-derived variants have been linked to immune function, likely providing resistance to pathogens encountered in new island environments. Other studies have suggested Denisovan genes related to fat metabolism may have helped cold climate populations survive. The pattern is consistent. As modern humans moved into new environments, they picked up genetic tools from the archaic populations already adapted to those environments. The Denisovans didn't just coexist with our ancestors, they equipped them, but we still didn't have a face. Until 2025. In 1933, a laborer digging for gravel on the banks of the Songhua River in Harbin, China, pulled something out of the ground that he immediately knew was significant. It was a skull. Massive, heavy. Unlike anything he'd seen, he hid it. He wrapped it and lowered it into a well to keep it from being seized, and he told no one. For 85 years, the skull sat in that well. Nearing the end of his life, the laborer told his grandson. In 2018, the family brought the fossil to Hebei GEO University. In 2021, a team of researchers declared it a new species, Homo longi, dragon man, based on its extraordinary size and morphology. The cranium measured over 9 inches long. The brain case held 1,420 cubic centimeters, within the range of modern humans. The brow ridges were heavy, the face was wide and flat. Many scientists immediately suspected it was a Denisovan, but suspicion isn't confirmation. Confirmation came in June 2025. A team led by Xiahe Fu published 2 papers, one in Science, one in Cell, reporting that they had extracted both ancient proteins and mitochondrial DNA from hardened dental calculus on one of the skull's molars. The molecular data was unambiguous. The Harbin individual was a Denisovan. After 15 years of searching, the ghost lineage finally had a face. Wide, flat, heavy-browed, massive, not what most people imagined, but real. Here's what the Denisovan story actually tells us. Human history is not a straight line. It's not a clean tree with separate branches. It's a web of encounters, relationships, and shared ancestry that we're only beginning to map. For hundreds of thousands of years, multiple kinds of humans shared this planet. They met. They had children. They passed genes across what we used to call species boundaries. And then most of them disappeared, leaving only fragments. A finger bone, a jawbone, a skull in a well, a few % of someone's genome. The Denisovans are gone, but they're not entirely gone. They're in the altitude adaptation of Tibetan communities. They're in the immune systems of Papuan populations. They're in the DNA of billions of people who have never heard their name. The ghost lineage is still with us. If this story changed how you think about human history, or if it raised a question I didn't answer, drop it in the comments. And if you want more videos like this, deep dives into the science that rewrites what we thought we knew, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Thanks for watching.